The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Maynard Bangs presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Bangs.
This, of course, where any standard judge would be ready. Be seated! Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People versus Prometheus, a 2012 sci-fi horror film that serves as a prequel to the iconic Alien franchise, following a team of scientists that venture into space to uncover the origins of mankind. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Big Ben Haslar, you are representing the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. There's just one big question I have for you today, jurors, but don't worry, it's an easy one. The question is, why? Why, Ridley Scott? Why? The answer comes back pointing to ambiguity. Directors like Scott love ambiguity because now they don't have to answer the why. They can just put what they feel on the screen, and if it makes sense, great. And if not, well, maybe you're just not thinking hard enough about it. Or maybe the point of the movie is just that it made you ask the questions. I'd like to point you all to an episode of One Track Mind where Ryan Luis Rodriguez and Mike Natale discuss the commentary of Donnie Darko. You watch Donnie Darko for the first time and your mind is just alive with questions because of that ambiguity. And it's framed in a way where you think director Richard Kelly is holding certain key pieces of information back from you in order for you to discover it. You listen to the commentary track, however, and discover that wasn't quite the case. Kelly's ideas were actually much dumber than the ones that you were creating in your head, which allows films and film directors to sort of thrive in this environment where they don't have to explain themselves because they don't know. They're just making crap up. And if people ask, well, okay, but what does it mean? They would frustratedly reply, why do you have to always know what things mean? I suffered through this 2-hour monstrosity, and I want to know why. Why would an engineer destroy himself by drinking goo to create humanity, to want to destroy humanity later, to want to create androids and other characters who may be androids, who maybe not, to create space worms, to create facehuggers, to create xenomorphs, to tangentially reference Greek mythology, to tangentially reference another franchise that they had, and is really what we were interested in this whole time? Why? Why? Don't give me a cop-out, don't explain an ending. Give me a reason why the engineers abandoned humanity so that I can be properly disappointed in it. And speaking of disappointment, can you imagine how disappointing it would be to find out that the reason we had to sit through this, the reason we're all in this courthouse today, the reason Scott not only made this with its unanswered ambiguity was, to paraphrase David, because he could.
Thank you, Mr. Haslar. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Ethan Ireland. Please present your opening statement.
I'm sorry, but my official title is Sinquisitor Ethan Ireland. Your Honor, I do apologize for having to correct you on that.
This court shall recognize your title, Sinquisitor. All right.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, esteemed colleagues, Your Honor. Today you see before you an excellent film. Not a perfect film, but an excellent one whose qualities are overlooked because my honorable opponents in the prosecution seek to raise the bar of expectation to perfection. After all, any prosecution's threshold is beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt, not beyond any doubt. But they would have you judge this film beyond any doubt. Only a scant few movies in history have ever achieved perfection. I am eager, nay, gleeful, to defend this excellent but not perfect movie. Our system of cinema laws has deemed that all movies be considered excellent until proven awful beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt, and I am doubtless that Prometheus shall be exonerated. So, just as a brief overview, Prometheus had outstanding cinematography provided by Dariusz Wolski, known for his work on high-caliber films such as Dark City, The Crow, Crimson Tide, and 3 films in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Wolski would return to work with the director of Prometheus, Ridley Scott, 8 more times, including on such stunners as The Martian and Napoleon. More on Ridley Scott in a moment, but you can't find a movie that Dariusz Wolski did that is bad. Prometheus also had outstanding production design and a cast featuring some of the biggest names in the industry, including Charlize Theron, Idris Elba, Guy Pearce, and the peerless Michael Fassbender, all of whom gave outstanding, well-directed performances. I posit that any complaints about this film are trifling.
Thank you, Mr. Ireland. Mr. Haslar, you may proceed with your trifling first exhibit.
Well, I would like to go back to my opening statement if I could, and really I'd like to hear from this defense counselor why that infection. I get that David sort of infects this other guy because he could, but goo that's ingested that mutates in one person one way, but also creates a child another way, doesn't really feel like strong biology here. Nor is David really creating life, but facilitating another species and creating it. Or is he just going based on instructions from Wayland? They never.
Your
really
Honor, objection. Suspension of disbelief. Suspension of disbelief is required to watch films. There were no complaints about the existence of a fictional FTL drive or other concepts necessary to a sci-fi story.
I didn't say anything about the FTL drive. I asked about the goo, which is a new concept.
No,
So
I am objecting. I'm objecting because suspension of disbelief is required for a film. If you're going to hold to that standard, you have to object. You also have to complain about other non-fictional, other fictional aspects of the science fiction story that do not actually exist.
The court will weigh that the suspension of disbelief is predicated on answering Mr. Haslar's question of why.
Oh, I will get to that. Be certain I will get to that. But my point being is he is
much like Ridley Scott, Your Honor. He's waiting until I forget about it later, so then it doesn't become a sticking point.
I'm not. I will address this.
I'll let
most
Mr.
certainly.
Ireland continue it.
But I must object that if he is not going to suspend his disbelief, then he shouldn't be watching films in the first place.
Well, I'll agree to that. Mr. Haslar, would you like to elaborate further?
Okay, well, there's that goo. And then there's this other question of, is Charlize Theron a robot? Because the film seems to want to have it both ways. The captain kind of jokingly implies that she might be one. She sleeps in a cryo chamber, but we've seen androids do that in other alien films to trick other crew members. Both she and David refer to Wayland as a parent. She can seemingly pin a super strong android to a wall. We know only androids can do that. But it doesn't even answer that. Like, why bring up this question that we're all going to debate? Like, is it just to antagonize little pathetic nerds like me who just notice things and want to know what's going on? And
they should show us whether she dreams of electric sheep.
Yes, exactly. And we also want to know what the engineers were all about. Just give us something, give us a hint. A lot of, directors thrive in ambiguity, but they also kind of attempt to answer a question, even if they don't answer it fully. Ridley Scott doesn't really do that here. He just sort of, throws a bunch of things at the wall and sees what sticks for us.
Again, I have to object on the grounds of unfair expectation. Any fans expect an answer to all their questions about Alien in one single film. Anyone who has ever watched a Ridley Scott film can tell you that he never gives straight answers, because straight answers aren't fun. The fun comes from providing space for the audience's imagination to breathe. Ambiguity is the means in which he works, like watercolor for some painters. This is his theme, is ambiguity. I'll remind you, Ridley Scott gave us the cinematic equivalent of the debate over the existence of free will. Was Rick Deckard a replicant or was he a replicant? The fun is in the debate, in the ambiguity. Even Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott to this day continue arguing about whether Deckard was bacon or sizzling.
I think Harrison Ford doesn't really care, honestly.
I will grant that Harrison Ford... can I swear on this show?
Please do. Please fucking do.
Okay, I absolutely acknowledge that Harrison Ford could give less than a millifuck about what people what people argue about.
Hell yeah, brother!
But the problem that you're ringing with Blade Runner, there's really only that one question: is Deckard a replicant or replicant, as you put it? That's really the only question. There's not that much ambiguity beyond that. That's the question that we're left to answer and figure out. Prometheus has that kind of thing and more, and he doesn't strive to answer any of them. So there's a little bit of a difference there. There's only so much you can say, well, suspension of disbelief, I don't have to answer your questions. But you also have to have a primary theme that we are invested in, something that we are sitting in this theater for 2 hours for.
Well, if you don't like ambiguity, don't watch Ridley Scott films. That's all I can tell you.
I'm okay with some
If you don't like ambiguity, don't watch his movies. That's like saying I don't like oil paintings. Okay, you don't like oil paintings. Go look at pastels. You don't like paintings in general. Go listen to radio. There are so many other art forms and so many other people who work in themes in art that might be more to your taste. Your personal opinion about not liking an artist's chosen method of work does not make this a bad movie. It means you don't like it.
Well, you brought up the Alien prequel. I'm going to move on to that. The big problem looming over Prometheus is, of course, it is an Alien prequel, and it has little to do with xenomorphs.
No, it is not.
The movie...
It
wasn't advertised as an Alien prequel. You will
it was
agree
not.
with that, right?
It was not an Alien prequel.
So
he specifically said that it is no more an Alien prequel than the xenomorph could be called Gilbert Kane Jr.
Okay, fine. So I'll concede that. So I went into this theater not knowing that. And then I started to see little things that are like Alien and like the robots and all that. And I was wondering what's going on here? This is sort of like a film that I've already seen. And as it rolled onto its conclusion, there was this, it was clearly set in the same universe. I kind of got that, but I thought, okay, it's a spin-off. But then it ends with that damn xenomorph. So this thing that I was waiting through for the whole movie to show up or not, that wasn't advertised to be a part of this universe, that loomed over the whole thing. And my thought process as I was watching it just shows up at the end in sort of this disappointing close. This was made worse by the fact that it is followed by Alien Covenant, which does advertise itself as part of the series. And also
then judge Alien Covenant on its own grounds. Prometheus is a film that can and should be watched entirely in a vacuum where no one can hear you scream.
Well, the whole reason
we do judge films a bit in a vacuum, so I'll sustain that.
If this movie was meant to be thought of an Alien movie, like the Thing reboot, we sort of did during the Hell on Reels, the technology doesn't match up. Even though this takes place before that movie. There were no hologram Rubik's Cubes in that movie. There were no holograms, period. So how can I enjoy this movie now in a vacuum or not, if I'm continually subconsciously comparing it to this other better movie throughout its entire runtime?
Well, maybe the assumption shouldn't be that everybody who has watched Prometheus will have seen all the other or any of the other Alien films. Maybe it should be just watched as a film on its own. If you compare it to another film, then that's on you.
Let's say that, but it ends with that xenomorph. So if I've never seen Alien, what does that mean to me?
Well, if you've never seen Alien, then it should come to you as a surprise.
What though? I don't know what it is. It's another creature. I've seen 10 of them. So what?
Yeah, well, it should tell you not to fuck around with genetic engineering and play God. That's what it should tell you.
Well, I'll tell you a bit of that. But I guess the question from the bench is or what you're saying is that is Alien a required viewing of this film? Is this film standing on Alien's shoulders?
I would argue that Prometheus isn't perfect. It's an excellent film that stands doubly overshadowed by perfection, and unfortunately by the curse of expectation. But it is a film that can and should be watched on its own without necessarily trying to force a connection to other films that could potentially be in the same franchise. But it is a film that, like a haiku, should be taken as a complete Zen totality.
Is that Exian?
No, Zen as in the more you try to explain it, the further you get away from understanding its meaning. It is an experience on its own.
My argument to the jury is it tries to have it both ways, and therefore it fails both ways, because if you're looking at it as a prequel, it fails because it doesn't compare and nothing lines up. And if you are looking at it as a prequel, it fails because it doesn't have anything that you care about. So
I do have exhibits of my own to present.
I will have
Yes,
one more,
yes,
and then
Mr.
I will
Haslar
happily
will
pass
have
it to
another
you.
exhibit, and then
Sure.
we'll pass it over.
And I doubt that this will sink the film for the jury, but this is for my own personal enjoyment. I want to get it off my chest because Prometheus does suffer from this trend, and it's 3D. Why does this zombified corpse of 3D keep reanimating itself every few decades to bite us in the ass? I mean, on the one hand, I get it. If I could actually see a film in 3 dimensions, that would be great. But as it stands, the technology we have, we cannot do that. We are only giving ourselves splitting migraines thanks to staring at a screen of 2 hours of something tricking our eyes. No, dude, people would say to me, defending it, it's not like the red and blue color-coded kind, and yeah, those were lame, but this is actually in color. Okay, yeah, it's slightly better because I don't see like the little red and blue ghosties throughout it, but it's still an optical illusion. The glasses still make everything darker. If you tilt your head even half a degree one way, everything starts to get out of whack. And if you find this out in the film, if you didn't clean your glasses all the way, or that teenager who they hired to sort of wipe it off, like left these ugly streaks, you're like sitting there trying to polish it the whole time. Or sometimes you have to wear them on top of your ordinary glasses. It's all a friggin' nightmare. And to bring this to Prometheus, it was one of those films that was in on that trend, and it went all in. And that theatrical experience was trash. And now the home version is trash as well, because you can instantly tell this movie was made for 3D by the way it's shot and the way things are laid out. Anytime there's a hologram, you think, that's a weird way to frame that shot. 3D memories, 3D communication. This is just not this is one of those damn 3D movies, wasn't it? And the plethora of these shots just continually take it from one to the next throughout the movie. And on that, I will rest, Your Honor.
It's okay to admit that you have no depth perception. It's okay. You can admit it. We're not going to mock
the
you.
problem is I do. It looks like, that scene in Home Alone where Michael Jordan is like on a train, but he's like a flat cardboard cutout. It looks like that.
No.
Like he's like a sort of a distance, but he's flat.
Yes, well, because we don't have the technology to do actual 3D projection. We do have the ability to do stereography and stereoscopy. And having pulled focus on that rig, I can tell you that it is an extreme technical skill. It's hard enough to be a competent cinematographer, and then it is doubly hard to do it and be a competent stereographer. That is one thing that Dariusz Wolski should have gotten an Academy Award for. It's hard to do it once. It's extra hard to do it in 3D. So the fact that he pulled it off and made a film that looks as beautiful as this one does should be something that exonerates it on its own. But just because you don't like 3D, that's fine. If you don't care for 3D, there's lots of people who don't. But the fact is that the level of technical skill required to pull off what he pulled off cannot be argued with. And I know from personal experience, having worked in camera department for a decade, that it's really hard.
Well, Mr. Haslar, thank you. Mr. Island, you may present your first exhibit.
Okay, well, for Exhibit A, I'm going to turn to Ridley Scott. I told you I would mention him before.
He was involved, so I believe.
Yeah, Ridley Scott is not just a perfectionist. He has managed to pull off what I think you could consider to be perfection, cinematic perfection, twice. It's hard enough to do once. He's done it at least twice. Perfection is a double-edged sword, and any artist who manages to achieve perfection becomes a victim of their own success. Not just from their fans, but from themselves. All their works, past and future, get judged against the standard of their greatest achievement, or in the case of Ridley Scott, pair of achievements, Blade Runner and Alien. Any other works that might be considered good or great pale by comparison. They could be excellent, but because they're not perfect, people are going to say they're dog shit. Consider the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci. I say da Vinci, what painting immediately springs to mind, Your Honor?
Me? Oh, I only think of his ornithopter.
Oh, come on.
It's not a painting.
By reflex, Mona Lisa.
Anybody
who tells me it's anything other than Mona Lisa being the first thing that pops into your head is a fucking liar.
It was the ornithopter. It's that drawing. It's because we saw the vulture that was drawn by him.
Paintings. I said the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci,
Supper,
not his illustrations, not his engineering works, his paintings.
I was thinking of the Vitruvian Man.
Oh, nonsense.
Oh, yeah. See, this guy's got a lot.
His exhibit is failing all over you.
We'll say for the sake of argument that the majority of the world, when you hear name a painting painting by Leonardo da Vinci, the reflex response is going to be Mona Lisa, because it's the world's most famous painting. It's been copied endlessly. It's inspired countless other works. Over the centuries, people have analyzed every single facet of Mona Lisa, from the background to her smile, to her clothing, to the composition and psychology in the background, and on and on and on and on and on. And it is widely considered to be an example of a perfect painting. And because of that, Mona Lisa overshadows Da Vinci's other paintings like Salvator Mundi, or my personal favorite, La Belle Ferronnière, because they are merely excellent.
Well,
Ridley Scott, who might
Mr.
well be
Haslar,
considered...
Did you name a few famous ones?
I thought I did. The Last Supper and all
That's
those.
a pretty famous one.
So your argument, though, is that because Da Vinci is great, and people like always compare him this way, that maybe other artworks don't shine, that Ridley Scott is the same way because he directed Blade Runner. I didn't bring up Blade Runner. You did.
I'm not talking about Blade Runner. I am making a point that the director of Ridley Scott, who might well be considered the Da Vinci of cinema.
Okay, but he directed Blade Runner. He directed Alien.
Yes,
I don't compare it to Blade Runner. I mean, maybe if I'm talking about David specifically, I might. But I compared the movie on its own, and the comparison to Alien, it invites that comparison by linking it to the xenomorphs at the end. So.
Well, my point being is that any artist who manages to achieve perfection, regardless of whether it's thematically the same, it gets their works judged against the standard of their greatest achievement, even by themselves. So because you're trying so hard to, like, if you achieve perfection, it's almost impossible to achieve it a second time. And even though you might try really hard, you don't want to foul it up. So you're going to be extra careful. This movie it only seems bad because you're comparing something that's excellent against something that's perfection. And in this case, by two other things, by the same director, that have been considered widely, not by me, but widely by cinephiles to be cinematic perfection.
Well, again, you're trying to have it both ways by saying, okay, it's a Ridley Scott film, and you're unfairly comparing it to other Ridley Scott films. But I'm also looking at it and like, okay, well, it's with all the ambiguity here, and you're like, well, Ridley Scott loves ambiguity.
Oh, I'm getting there.
Okay,
I'm getting there.
Right. Well,
that's in one of my other exhibits. My point is that Ridley Scott, as I said, might be well considered the Da Vinci of cinema. Himself a Renaissance man who is well schooled in composition, design, writing, draws his own storyboards in the same style as the French comic illustrator Moebius. Like, they look like Moebius illustrations. He is unquestionably one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Few directors in history can rival the beauty, the depth, the influence of his films. Like I said, he's achieved perfection at least twice, widely considered by lots of cinephiles. But every other Ridley Scott film, The Bounty, Thelma and Louise, Black Hawk Down, Gladiator. Yes, I'll even count 1492, The Conquest of Paradise, Black Rain, and Kingdom of Heaven are all works of surpassing excellence. Not quite perfection, but excellence. Bloated? Sure. Flawed? Certainly. But none of them are bad.
But do any of them have like the notoriety that Prometheus has? Because I don't think anyone's like saying, well, he made this film and that's not as good as Alien, and he made that film and that's not as good as Alien. They're saying Prometheus isn't as good as Alien because it invites it.
Well, this is where we run into the thing of, as I said, because he's trying to live up to the standard of his own perfection, as any artist ages, especially one who bears that curse of perfection, they're going to be careful about their legacy. And in this case, I will grant that Ridley Scott may have been overly cautious.
I
he
think
knows
his
audiences
about Ridley Scott and his legacy and perfection. Mr. Arlen.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that he knows the audiences have come to expect deeply nested layers of meaning and carefully structured ambiguities. And I grant he may have erred in being a little too oblique and impenetrable here. But like I said, the film isn't perfect. It's just excellent.
All right. Would you like to present your next exhibit to show why it's excellent? Oh,
sure. Actually, I can do that. That was going to be my exhibit C, because I was going to try to answer my honorable opponent's questions more directly about ambiguity. But if you'd like me,
please.
Okay. So as I said, it's merely an excellent film, doubly overshadowed by perfection. And in this case, one of those shadows is cast by, as I said, Ridley Scott. The other one is cast by not one, but two other films from the same franchise from which it is descended. So it is related. Like, it isn't exactly it isn't exactly the same franchise. But first is Alien. The second is Aliens, which is another example of cinematic perfection, but from a different director, James Cameron. As we all know, the quality of Alien sequels declined rapidly after that point. Audiences were repeatedly disappointed over the 20 years between 1992 and 2012. We know Alien 3, which wasn't a bad movie, but deeply flawed. Alien Resurrection kind of towed the line of actually being a bad movie because it was a tonal mismatch. And then you actually had the actual bad movies, the unspeakable misfortune that was Alien versus Predator and its tragic sequel. Okay, fast forward to 2012. It's hard for any franchise to return to its wellspring. All of you here are familiar with, what was that movie that came out in 1977 that was basically like Battlestar Galactica meets Excalibur?
Space battles.
Spaceballs.
Oh, right. Yeah. The Star Wars. That showed us what happens when audiences are given decades. And this is my objection to the prosecution's argument. He is having a Star Wars argument, which is to say he's been given decades to obsess over every tiny little detail of production design, the fans have done this. They've created reams of fan fiction about every background character, including that one guy who appears on screen for all 38 frames, and then they inhabit their own little imaginary fiefdom in the canon. There have been comics and toys and video games and novels and blah, blah, blah. It's impossible for an artist to satisfy the fan base, because what's happened is the fan base is not in love with your art. They're in love with the mental world they've created as a composite of their engaging with it across a variety of platforms, and they're in love with the parasocial relationships they built with the characters, not the movie. A filmmaker who returns directly to the source material can't win. If you give the fans what they want and you answer all their questions, they'll curse your movie for being a predictable rehash that is nothing but a bunch of fan service jerking off. If you give them something new and different, then they'll curse your movie for not meeting their expectations, because you can't. Their expectations are built entirely in their own head. Don't forget, the fandom did exactly what they had been begging for with Alien versus Predator, and those sucked.
I'd like to hear Mr. Haslar's objection.
He's projecting onto me an argument that I did not make. I had said that I went into this movie blind. I did not know it was an alien thing, and I was confused by that because I kept thinking this is a little bit too similar to that other film I've seen. Why is he doing that? I don't understand why. And if he didn't show that xenomorph at the end, I would have been like, okay, cool.
Mr. Haslar raises the point that this film was not advertised as an alien film, so it didn't set up that expectation.
But he did argue that people went in comparing it to Alien, and
because the alien shows up at the end.
The alien shows up at the end. But you also said that you can't. I was trying to tell you have to watch the film on its own without trying to draw comparisons to Alien. You yourself argued that that Alien that anybody watching this will compare it to Alien.
I went in blind,
would like to hear some exhibits about
similar.
Prometheus.
I will get there. But my point being is this, is that the fandom got exactly what it had been begging for with Alien versus Predator, and those movies both sucked. Those were bad movies. So
stipulated.
But they're not on trial today, Prometheus.
They're not on trial. My point being is that that people came in. The reason why he made the story the way he made the story, the reason why he told the film the way he told the film is A, because ambiguity is his medium, and B, because he was gonna make his movie and he wasn't gonna let the fans tell him, oh, you need to have this and you need to have that. Oh, wait, hang on. And because if you do fan service, your film's gonna suck. You can look at all the Star Wars sequel series for that. Like, take The Mandalorian.
Objection. He said, if you do fan service, your movie's going to suck. What was that last shot? What was it?
That last shot was not fan service. That last shot, in fact, is not a xenomorph. That is something else entirely. The whole point being that it is a potential relative.
If it looks like a xenomorph, it smells like a xenomorph.
Objection. It is called a proto-xenomorph. It's also nicknamed the Deacon.
It is called the Deacon. That's correct. It is
or proto-xenomorph.
Or proto-xenomorph. But because the whole point being is that there's, you meddle with genetic engineering and you're not going to be happy with the results. We'll get to that when I talk about the themes within Prometheus. But my point being is that the Mandalorian Actually, no, we're not arguing. My whole point is that it was a success because it included a few of the elements that the fandom had imagined, but just a sprinkling. It built on those themes and expanded the universe in a much more fulfilling way, and in a way that created more questions that it answered. Hence, it created space for the fans' imagination to fill in the details. Likewise with Prometheus, it provides some partial answers, but only in a way that allows the imagination of the audience some breathing room. You mock Ridley Scott's ambiguity? That's why. If you answer all the questions, it's boring.
The Mandalorian sort of allows you to pretend and fantasize, whereas it feels like Prometheus to me is just making narrative shortcuts because he couldn't figure out how to connect those dots.
Oh, he didn't necessarily need to connect the dots because it's more fun. He knows, as a filmmaker who at this point is 86 years old, he knows that it's more fun for the audience to connect those dots themselves.
I'd like to move on to the next exhibit because there will be, only so much time.
Okay. So let's talk about the deep themes, and this is what makes this film actually excellent. Okay. And I apologize if it feels like I'm going to be a little too academic here, but
impossible.
I don't know. Some films are you're just going to need to have an academic underpinning to enjoy fully. So one of Ridley Scott's perennially recurrent themes. So we're going to talk about the fractal hubris of this film. So one of his recurrent themes is, and one that which he's really excelled, is what happens when you meet God and it turns out that he's just some dude. This was one of the major underlying themes that made Blade Runner so compelling, and it's a theme upon which he elaborates recursively in Prometheus. So to start off, let's look at the original Promethean myth. You got Zeus. He wakes up in the morning having a vague idea of, let's have some little miniature versions of the Olympian gods running around. We can keep them as pets. So he finds an underling, Prometheus, who is a Titan, who he delegates the actual execution of the idea to. Basically, Prometheus had all the engineering expertise and technical skill. He was the Steve Wozniak to Zeus's Steve Jobs. After Prometheus did all the hard work, crafted the humans from clay, Zeus shows up, gives him a thumbs up, pat on the back, scoops up the humans, takes them back to Olympus for a little press conference to the rest of the god, where he claims all the credit for himself before he gets bored and moves on to something else. But the key portion of the myth here is where Zeus forbade the gods and titans to ever allow humanity to get fire, because he'd gotten a prophecy that if humans ever got fire, it would allow them to one day surpass the gods because they would no longer fear or need them. And by fire, I'm not just talking about the physical tool. I'm also talking about the concept of creativity and divinity, which actually is kind of surprisingly on the nose for a 3,000-year-old myth, ain't it? You also might find it funny that the Prometheus literally translates to foresight, and his little brother Epimetheus is hindsight. But Prometheus felt pity for his creations because they were the playthings of the gods, left shivering in the dark and cold. So he broke the law, gave him fire, and Zeus got pissed off, chained Prometheus to a rock, and sent an eagle to tear out his liver every day for eternity. And he also punished humanity by trying to wipe them out with a great flood. But Prometheus, because he had foresight, gave one human the instructions to build a great ark in which humanity could ride things out and survive. So you can see that whole myth reconstructed in sci-fi miniature in Prometheus. But let's take a look at the main story. You've got scientists who discover evidence of intelligent design for life on Earth, so a billionaire tech bro puts together a space expedition to go meet these engineers, and it turns out they're flawed mortals who played with fire and found out that it burns. Titanic, technologically advanced mortals, but mortals just the same. And keep in mind that, again, like the engineers, Prometheus possessed godlike powers, but both he and the gods suffered all the same flaws and vulnerabilities as mortals who were shaped in their image. But keep in mind, too, that in Greco-Roman myth, the fastest way for mortals to piss off the gods was to remind them that they had flaws. So let's take a look at how this theme is repeated fractally within the main story. So let's take Michael Fassbender's character, David 8. Peter Wayland, a stand-in for any billionaire tech bro you could happen to name, who might also be extremely litigious, so I'm not going to say any other names.
I hope he listens.
He's created his own little homunculus and has given it all the shit jobs to do. But David 8 realizes in pretty short order that he's actually superior to his creator, and yet is still expected to pay Wayland deference and keeps on taking all those shit jobs without complaint. expected to do all this stuff. So that's not really surprising. He develops his own agenda, takes some questionable inspiration from fascists of history, and realizes pretty fast that it doesn't need a whole Scooby gang to solve the mystery of LV-223. In fact, within a couple of minutes after arriving on the planet, it pretty much puts it all together, figures out both that the God fire is there and how to take it for itself. And the rest of the time, he's just fucking around to find out. So now we're looking at a vastly more complex theme than Blade Runner ever had, because now it's what happens when you meet God and find out that he's just some dude, but then you realize you're actually vastly superior to him and you've seized the power of his creator. So there's still more nested layers of meaning with David 8, because clearly there's the surface layer of man being overthrown by his own creation, which you may also want to take special note of the fact that the first time this appears is in the 1818 novel Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus. If you think that's mere coincidence, you don't know Ridley Scott. Keep in mind that in the late 2000s, the other thing to keep in mind is that in the late 2000s, when this film was in development, there were a number of thinkers pondering artificial intelligence. Several papers and books were written warning about what might happen when general AI exceeds the ability of its creators, what might happen if and when it develops its own agendas that might be completely inscrutable to our understanding, in the way that the finest minds in dog intelligence could never understand the intricacies of the internal combustion engine. If it seems like you can't understand why David is doing what he's doing, that's the point. He's an AI.
I get that that's the point.
Objection?
I get that that's the point. And I think that again, it's that ambiguity that he's just trying to have too much. It sounds great on paper. Like all these notes and stuff that he's like, ooh, that's a cool idea, and that's a cool idea, and that's a cool idea. Sure, but it doesn't execute it that way. You're not thinking in those terms while you're watching the movie. It doesn't lead you through that journey.
Because Ridley Scott knows that watching the movie is only part of the experience. You come away from the film and you spend time thinking about it and pondering it and analyzing the themes and working it over and having those connections of revelation yourself. This is a movie produced by a guy who's an intense, very devout Catholic, and that is a part of the Catholic experience. Reading the Bible is only. I'm not a Catholic. I'm a Buddhist. But my point being is that Catholics believe that the revelations happen in your time pondering the source material, not while you're reading the source material.
All right, Mr. Island, I think there's time for one final exhibit before we go to closing arguments.
Well, this is kind of toward the end. This is kind of the tech bro angle too. So there's a reason why the film opens with a TED Talk. If you're watching TED Talks in the era preceding this film, you'll recognize that Ridley Scott included some of the tech innovations that appeared in those TED Talks. But the producers of Prometheus wanted the hubris of narcissistic tech billionaires firmly in the forefront of the audience's mind. That hubris is all over the movie, but it is never so perfect as when elderly Peter Weyland is standing before one of his presumed creators and demanding immortality through the questionable mouthpiece of his own creation, David 8. Weyland's assumption is that David will perfectly translate his desires, but as we've established, David has its own agendas. Now, we saw how this demand played out between Roy Batty and Eldon Tyrell, but in this iteration, the power dynamic is very different. We see that all the tremendous wealth and privilege that Weyland has allowed to give him a sense of godhood doesn't mean jack to the engineer.
Okay. Any further exhibits for you close?
Nope.
All right. All sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Haslar, you may begin.
As our defense attorney went into great detail, Prometheus was a titan who stole fire from the gods to spark technology and critical thought within humanity. Technology and critical thought that the gods meant to hoard for themselves, and as punishment, Prometheus was chained down for all eternity. Much like that, I have been chained down by gifting you the thought of critical thought for lamer movies. Or with my current 3-case losing streak, maybe I stole cotton candy from the gods. I don't know. I do know that I look at Prometheus and I see ancient Scotlanders making art in caves that they kind of get the creation story right. Like really, really right. Like an event that none of them witnessed, yet they all sculpted the engineer with his clothes in perfect fashion, with these stars that are aligned with pinpoint accuracy. These cave people can barely draw mammoths correctly, yet they measured out the exact right dimension so it lands up with that stars in that galaxy far, far away, unviewable by the human eye at Earth. Why? How? That would imply the engineers told them about it, but they too were as that wouldn't explain that dumbass opening, right? Where he was alone and they just flew off. So, what's going on here? You have to assume at some point X, Y, and Z must have happened, but it doesn't give you that. It doesn't make you... Ridley Scott wants to make you feel something rather than actually telling you what is factually on the page. So think about this movie. What lines up? What doesn't? Thank you, jury.
Thank you. Mr. Island, please present your closing argument.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, again, I will say that this is not a perfect film. It is an excellent film on a number of standards by which one would judge an excellent film. Yes, there are moments there are flawed, but aren't all mortals flawed? Aren't the gods themselves flawed? My point is that these complaints, when compared against the overall body of work from the filmmaker who works in ambiguity as Da Vinci worked in oils, this is his medium. If you complain about it, you can watch a different filmmaker's films. You're not obliged to watch a Ridley Scott picture. By every other measure, this film is excellent. If you find the story impenetrable, there is a great deal by which you can spend analyzing and trying to understand the themes and connect the dots yourselves, because Ridley Scott understands and appreciates. He respects the audience's ability to fill in the gaps themselves. In this case, when you couldn't see the thing that made the alien and Alien so scary was that you never got a complete picture of it. In this case, what makes this film so interesting is that you never get a complete picture of all the pieces. You get to put them together yourself.
That is scary.
All right. Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, Mr. Maynard Bangs, and Mr. Superior Species, no doubt, Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way. And for this trial only, you'll find nice champagne poured for each of you. Pay me no mind as I stick my grubby fingers in each one of your glasses.
I'll drink yours, Maynard.
Sure, please do.
Little finger never hurt anyone.
All right. Very interesting case. Lots of passion coming down here. I thought it was very interesting, this argument about whether or not it should be so closely related to Alien. I mean, it had to be mentioned, the organization was Weyland-Yutani. I mean, so I think it's fair to say this movie was inviting at least some comparison to Alien.
This is 100% a prequel.
It's okay. A prequel. And no one put a gun to Ridley Scott's head to make a movie in this universe.
Exactly. He decided to come back. That was
okay. So we're all on the same page on
Absolutely.
that point. Okay, very good. Because I wanted to get that
did not cleared up on that.
Okay. So then let us go to our great friend from California, Ryan Luis Rodriguez. How are you feeling about the case, the movie, the arguments, all that good stuff?
I like this movie. I give it a gentleman's 7. I enjoyed it immensely when I saw it in the theater. It was, I believe, the first R-rated 3D movie I'd ever seen, and maybe only. 3D? I saw it in 3D. I was totally psyched. I was completely primed for it, being an Alien nut. But what I found interesting about the arguments is that...
Could I ask a pause? How did you know it was an Alien movie going in before? If it was,
I had been reading a lot of the trades about it.
Okay.
So yeah, I was aware that it was at least tangentially related to Alien. But in the end, that last shot tells you this is an Alien prequel. You cannot disassociate the two. And I thought it was interesting that a lot of the discussion centered around not being looking at this in a vacuum, yet comparing it to other Ridley Scott movies. Mm-hmm. So which one is it? Does it compare to other Ridley Scott movies, or is it completely on its own in a vacuum? And I think that is an interesting question that was raised in these arguments.
Yeah, I liked when Ben brought up that point. He goes, well, if it's in a vacuum, then what's with that last scene? It's like, ooh, gotcha there, buddy. But I like Ethan's academic approach to it at the end about breaking it down. Like, this is in Ridley Scott's idiom, right? And what does that mean? What is the story it's telling? How is this deconstructing and rebuilding the Prometheus myth. And the problem with that is it's interesting if you think it's interesting. I'm on record proving that Ridley Scott is a hack, and
That's true.
I know. And the issue is so while I appreciate the rigor he brought to it, it's just like it's not an interesting man asking, which is ultimately not a very interesting question. So if you're going to be thinking about the answers yourself, they ultimately really don't matter. So if the whole point of the movie is to think about it after you're done watching it, I have to say it falls on its face there, because I simply don't care enough while I'm watching the movie because of the numerous deficiencies present that Ben brought up. You're wondering what's up with these engineers, like we've seen this story before where you get to meet the creators of humanity, right? Like Star Trek The Next Generation had an episode about this where the Romulans, Klingons, and Federation, they all meet on this planet. They're all going to come to blows. And then they find out that there was this ancient civilization that's actually the root of all of them. And that's why they're all vaguely humanoid, and that was done much better than Prometheus and actually had a very interesting takeaway for it without all this ambiguity. So if the idea is like, okay, you're going to have to percolate and meditate on it yourself, it's like, well, frankly, I don't want to, because I don't think you made a very compelling film. Maynard, what are you thinking?
Well, like the ambiguity was compared to Blade Runner, but in Blade Runner, what is set up is there's answer A and there's answer B, and I'll let it up to you to which one it is. Here, there's no, there's no answer A or B to even pick up from. It's like, well, why did they change their minds? That's what you're supposed to find out in the next movie. That's a plot point. I get it. But like their whole process of leaving people and why he just goes berserk and tries to kill people at the end. Yeah. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens that I'm not sure Ridley Scott knew why he was necessarily doing it. But I do think there are good things about this movie. And I think a lot of it's the performances out of Fassbender, but we didn't hear...
Fassbender is fucking amazing.
Right, exactly.
Oh
but
God,
we didn't hear
so good,
a lot.
but that didn't even come up. Yeah.
Yeah, or he just, their names were mentioned, but not actually what they did or how they did. We didn't hear anything, even from the prosecution, about the stupid scene where the ship is falling, where all they have to do is run to the side, and it may not roll and crush them. We didn't hear anything about that. We did hear about why is the technology different when it's 100 years earlier. Well, in Alien, they're space truckers, right? They're literally big rig space truckers out in the middle of nowhere. So they have a really shitty ship. That's why they have crap. And they don't have holograms.
In defense of the defense, he did mention how good Michael Fassbender was.
No, I was attacking the prosecution on that one. Like, the technology would be bad.
What? No, because you made a few different points here. But this idea that he didn't mention the great acting, he did bring it up. He did bring up Michael Fassbender is peerless and did a very good job of conveying David's... Yeah, no, but he
did focus on the character of David, and I was going to say that's my closing thing. That I thought was the defense's strongest point, is making parallels to the myth of Prometheus, to David, and showing that David is really the star of this kind of film that came out. So
yeah,
I think there's a lot of whataboutism stuff about alien stuff that I don't think really mattered, because ultimately the movie's not really about aliens. It's about Fassbender, and it's about the engineers, but it's mostly about Fassbender.
Yeah, and like he was saying too, it's like if you're having trouble understanding David's motivations, that could be part of the point, because he's operating on a different level of intelligence.
Literally operating on a differerent level. iOS 6, I believe.
Yes, exactly. No, so I thought that was...
Did anyone have problems with David's motivation?
What? No.
Yeah, I never thought anyone had trouble understanding that.
No, but why the characters in the movie were. That's the thing, because they were all trusting David and just going along with it. Because we know androids are bad as the viewers. There's, but they don't know that in the movie, right? So
I think humans are bad. No, I'm with David.
Yeah.
I'm on David's side.
I don't think David thinks humans are bad.
Yes. Watch Alien Covenant. Yes, he does.
Well, okay. Now, so if we're going to go into that, my goodness. But anyway, so... We had a lot of interest. I'm the foreman, right? So I guess I have to go last. All right. So Maynard, why don't you go ahead and lock in?
Well,
or Ryan, whoever wants to lock in.
I'll go first. I usually don't. I do agree. Nothing made Scott do another Alien movie, and it doesn't completely scratch anything that you want out of Alien. But what it does scratch is sci-fi movie stuff. Like, it just generically gives me sci-fi with monsters, with Fassbender, and with the tie-in to the Prometheus myth. I think there's enough meat on the bone here. What I'll say, it's not an excellent film, but it might be just good enough to get out of here. I'm going to go not guilty.
Very good. Ryan Luis Rodriguez.
I want to make it interesting for Dylan.
Oh, it won't be interesting. I know exactly where I'm leaning, so vote your
I think
heart.
I know where you are too, but I thought I should mention that.
Okay.
I appreciated both sides of the argument, but I do think that for a movie that's supposed to be looked at in a vacuum, we spend a lot of time comparing it to other movies. So I'm going to have to go with Ben's assertion that there's not really a lot there, even though I really like this movie. So I'm going to go guilty.
It's pretty.
All right. Yeah, no, and again, great case, but ultimately it just didn't move the needle. You know, if that's the stuff you're supposed to care about, then the movie failed. So I got to go with guilty as well, with a hat off to Ben. Now let's get out there and tell that very handsome judge.
He is, isn't he?
I think so.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of The People versus Prometheus, we find the defendant guilty of being a bad movie.
Boo!
Yeah! Ridley Scott's a hack.
The verdict is so rendered, I hereby order Ridley Scott to be chained to a rock for all eternity so an eagle can eat its liver over and over, whatever the thing is. Court is adjourned!
I can't say I'm surprised.
This is Grumbly Grumblerson furious that I just sat through a podcast about Diet Alien. Ethan Ireland, I've already forgotten your entire case. Tell us how you feel about the jury's verdict.
It sounded like it was a hung jury. You had one jury member who voted not guilty, and two others who voted guilty. So if you don't have a unanimous decision, I think we're going to win this one on appeal. I think the other two people are basically Philistines who are incapable of recognizing high art when they see it.
I agree with that.
You didn't even know Mona Lisa was done by Da Vinci. Shut up.
Ben Haslar, stop looking at me. I can't stand your face. I guess I have to ask you how you feel about the jury's verdict, even though I don't care.
That's what my last date said. Well, it's the Reels of Justice curse, unfortunately. You win the cases you want to lose and lose the ones you want to win. I liked Prometheus. I think it's a gentleman's six, and I did like Ethan Ireland's understanding of the movie. I think a lot of people rag on Prometheus, but they don't understand Prometheus. He does understand it, so I did enjoy hearing that dissection of all the points. Thank you, Grumbly.
That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis. I hate you all so very much.
He needs more fiber in his diet. I keep telling that, Grumbly.
All right, I'll have you know, Ethan, according to our official wiki entry of Reels of Justice, unlike a true common law jury trial in which a unanimous decision is required to convict, a majority vote is all that's needed to secure a guilty verdict. It's on the internet, so it must be in the wiki.
Section 4.
That's part of being a fake court, unfortunately. But they
Fake
give us
court, real
authority.
Well, it's okay. I come from a court where suspicion is enough to convict.
Oh, I like that.
Good one. I just think it's it's an okay mindless sci-fi movie. A little bit, it's kind of fun. I like the
No, I think
stuff.
it's very mindful.
But if you
I
think it's
like,
mindless, then he did fail. That's the thing. You can't have it both ways. Like either you're supposed to go away and think about it.
No, Scott doesn't
Yeah.
understand his movie, and he's not Leonardo da Vinci. Not at all. No.
I also have to get that part of my gag is I was trying to have it both ways because that's Ridley Scott's thing.
Also true.
No.
No, it was a good case. It's just that Ridley Scott's a hack. You can't do much with him. I'm sorry.
Well, I liked all the themes about Prometheus and finding your origin and creativity. I think they still touch on it pretty well.
I like
even
the
in the
idea of
second one.
God being a bum. I think that's
Yeah.
a terrific idea that
Just
needs
oh,
to be
man.
explored a lot more.
But still,
Well,
I'd like to know why. I do agree with you, Ben. I would like,
I first
answer
had
the
this.
questions you set up.
Oh,
Well, that's the thing, though. The answers aren't interesting. It's like, why did the engineer drink the goo and make humanity? It doesn't. Who cares?
Yeah.
It's not.
I wish he would have
interesting,
attempted
no
just
matter
go a
what the
little bit
answer
further
is.
than he did. If he went just a little bit further, it would have worked. If he explained some of it, and like you said,
But
answer A, answer
thematically-
B.
But also sort of thematically, that's what what you're seeing is the breakdown and reconstruction of the Promethean myth into a horror film. He shows you within the first few minutes of the film that's what he's gonna do.
So my theory is the engineer at the beginning was sentenced to death. They put him on the planet. He drank the goo and it killed him. It didn't destroy all of his DNA, and it birthed humanity. And the rest of the engineers had to
Thank
come
you,
back
Dylan.
for
I'll
the
go with
next
that.
person.
But you know what?
Yes.
You filled that in. He never explicitly
it's not
says that he
interesting.
created humanity. You
It's
filled
not
that in.
interesting.
You colored that in yourself.
Then maybe
because I couldn't. I was racking my brain.
And the point is, if it all it takes is dropping some DNA on the planet, a guy didn't need to die. Like he could have.
No, it was an accident. That's my point. It was an accident.
Oh no, I think they're seeding. Okay, so you think they did this accidentally, and that's why they got to clean it up. Well, then we do have a why.
Yes.
Oh shit, this guy wasn't supposed to die and create life, and now they're really annoying and flying all over space. We got to kill them all. But I think the aliens are so
No,
dangerous.
because it was 2,000 years when they were trying to wipe out. We weren't in space 2,000 years ago. It's stupid.
Dude, they can see in the future.
No, they can't.
They're Prometheus. They have foresight. You didn't even see the movie. Ethan, what have you been up to? What do you do when you're not here?
Oh, gee whiz. I am the not really the leader of the Cinemania Society, which is a podcast where we hold a sinquisition on films, where we are a secret society that gets together and watches weird movies and tries to analyze details, kind of like we do on this. But we're in our sinquisition, at the conclaves we hold, suspicion is enough to convict. So I'm surprised to actually have to put up a defense here, but I'm not surprised that it's found guilty.
It's not usual, huh?
And then on a totally different note, actually, this is nice to get to dust off these arguments, because I first had this argument shortly after this film came out with one of my colleagues on the Smosh set, a guy by the name of Kerry Sweeney, who is one of the absolute best grip electricians we have in the Sacramento area, like just hands down a fantastic person. And he hated the film. He brought up all the points that you did, and I brought up all the points that I did. So it was nice to get to kind of rehash all of this at this point, 12 years later.
Nice.
Yeah, pretty cool. And I hear you're the leader of the Cinemania Society. You said that's what I heard. That is what I heard. I heard you were the leader.
We agreed no leader, so they all shut up and do as I say.
What is somebody? What do you call someone who suffers from cinemania?
Well, I would say a person who suffers from cinemania. No, that's what I said. A person who suffers.
No, it's a cinemaniac.
Yeah, it's not going to work, man. You got to give it up.
Because they explained last time. Someone suffering from cinemania is a cinemaniac, but they're the society that saves them.
Yeah, we're the society.
Right.
Yeah,
they don't suffer from cinemania.
Yeah, you're
not cinemaniacs.
If you're the Cancer Society, you don't go around giving people cancer.
I know you guys use that.
Oh no, I've been doing it wrong.
I ripped that off wholesale from Andy.
Yes, a good guy to steal jokes from. Definitely recommend. So I always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies that you think people should see. So Ethan, what is a movie you think people should see?
I think people should see the movie that we are concluding our conclave on from 1932, The Island of Lost Souls.
Nice.
Ooh, very good.
Which only was it in 2012 or 2014 when it was finally obtainable in its complete and uncut version. If you want to watch a film that has its cinematic DNA sprinkled all throughout cinema in much the same way that the engineer has his DNA sprinkled throughout humanity, you need to watch that film, The Island of Lost Souls.
Is that is that kind of like Island of Dr. Moreau?
It is Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one.
It is. It's an adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau, although H.G. Wells was reportedly quite annoyed by it. But it actually kind of asks somewhat different questions in much the same way that Blade Runner asks somewhat different questions from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? I mean, they're about roughly equivalent in that it's not a direct adaptation, but they claim to be.
Oh, all right. People turn into animals?
No, it's the other way around. Animals are turned into people.
Oh, I do kind of like that. All right.
Yeah.
Wait,
Although the
that
book
was
is really good
episode
too.
in a row?
The book's really dark, like darker than the movie Dark.
I don't know. Leonardo da Vinci wrote Island of Dr. Moreau, I believe.
God, boo! Stop it, man.
Big Ben, what is your recommendation?
Prometheus deals with androids and the question of consciousness and creation, and my recommendation explores very similar themes. It's 2023's Pluto. And honestly, there's a lot in Pluto that we've seen before. There are definite elements of Alien, Blade Runner, iRobot, and Total Recall in it. And I'm sure we've seen these issues explored in other less deserving of mentioned titles as well. This whole what does it mean to be human plethora of sci-fi. But aside from the ones I mentioned, how many do it well? How many take the time to truly understand the questions that they're asking? And how many are in it for the, well, robots are cool, right? I love Pluto because it does explore the themes that we've seen before, but it does so with intentionality and care. To me, Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 were two films that explore this from a place kind of further along the technological timeline, where artificial life is now commonplace and not new and questionable. Pluto takes that place just a little bit further down the timeline. So if questions like the measure of a man are ones that you find intriguing, Pluto is definitely worth a peek.
Nice. Ryan, did you see this one?
No, I have not.
Is that an anime?
It's a 8-episode anime. Thanks for ruining it for me.
Oh, we're all like, how is there a cool sci-fi thing we've never heard of? Oh,
That's how.
no.
I deliberately withheld that information, but now the cat's out of the bag.
Well, it's
and I-
really
It's not
cool,
just-
so I Googled it, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute.
I was all.
And it's not
up.
just an anime. It's like an hour long per episode anime, so it's like 8 hours.
That's okay. Tell your waifu I said hello.
That's
Yeah,
a
that
low
would be
blow,
correct.
sir.
Exactly.
Maynard, you were the judgman. What? Is
Shit,
your
I was. You're right. I
recommendation?
thought it was
Yeah.
you. I was going to throw it to you. Let it never be said that I do not suffer for this podcast, because for your mere recommendation dollar, I sat through all of 2017's Alien Covenant
Oh, God.
again for like the 5th time. And to be honest, I still don't hate it that much, so it's my recommendation today. Taking place 11 years after the events of Prometheus, 2017's Alien Covenant follows a ship of colonists seeking to relocate to an uncharted planet, which turns out to be the ruins of the homeworld of the engineers. Now, I know this movie is probably destined for this courtroom one day too, but Big Ben can't be the only one to recommend case bait. However, let me tack on the rider. If you enjoyed Prometheus, you might enjoy Covenant as a companion piece. If you didn't like Prometheus, don't listen to this. Go away, do something else. But otherwise, Covenant expands on the lore of the engineers further. You get some cool new alien designs like the Neomorph, and you get the return of Michael Fassbender's David to continue his thread. It clearly is the result of enormous studio meddling after the fallout from Prometheus, with executives saying, make it about the fucking aliens. In fact, put it in the fucking title, cocksucker. So, hey, if you thought what was missing from Prometheus was xenomorphs, you get fucking xenomorphs, along with a bit more fleshing out of their origin, if that's something you wanted. Unfortunately, its reliance on CGI and a lot of these alien effects hold the film back. Still, take it from Baby Bear, you get a fun sci-fi horror adventure with wicked creatures, interesting environs, both natural and artificial, and two Fassbenders for the price of one. It's worth your time. Schlenzo, what have you got for us?
Well, can you believe that for somehow I have not recommended 1987's Predator yet? And it is really hard to do better for sci-fi action than that.
It's because you ain't got Blade.
Oh, man, I love this movie. Arnie and the boys look jacked as hell, and they're ready to fight. And now recently, we lost Carl Weathers, the actor, and his name was Dylan in the movie, which is kind of like my name. I say kind of like because we spelled it differently.
What's the matter, Dylan? Pushing too many pencils?
Take it easy on yourself, Dutch. And honestly, that joke lands every single time I run into people and we lock arms, but I always have to lose fake arm wrestling contests before it. Even if Stephen Hawking were to do it, he would have to say, what's the matter, Dylan? The CIA got you pushing too many pencils. And then I would lose to Stephen Hawking. But you know what? It would be worth it. Anyway, this movie really has it all when it comes to action and sci-fi. You've got a really compelling Predator design by none other than Stan Winston. Again, Arnie is at where our friend Simon might say full pomp. I will say full pump. Full pump with none other than Jesse the Body Ventura, also huge. Carl Weathers, huge. Sonny Landham, huge. I mean, and Bill Duke, not for nothing. He's no slouch. I mean, these guys.
Shane Black, huge.
Well, okay, Shane Black was only there because they had to hire him as an actor so he could do rewrites on the side. But that's the point. That's not the point. The point is this movie still holds up. I've seen it at least a dozen times, if not more, and it's always a joy to watch. I have no idea where it's streaming. For the love of God, just buy the damn thing. You won't regret it. Support your local library.
It's worth watching back to back. If you're going to do a double feature, do a double feature of Predator and RoboCop.
No, just do Predator and Predator. That's a great idea.
Wait a minute, I don't want one copy of Time Cop. Ryan, send us on home.
My recommendation this week is a recent release, which I just saw in the cinema just 2 days ago. 2024's Madam Web.
Oh.
Someone much wiser than I once said that movies have the power to change the world, and this is proof positive. The story completely makes sense and isn't jarring in the least. The antagonist is the most memorable in recent memory. Dakota Johnson isn't completely out of her depth, and the dialogue isn't haphazardly ADR'd in every single scene. This is a life-affirming masterpiece that will set the box office on fire. Never mind that I saw it on a Sunday afternoon with maybe 15 other theatergoers. I can't wait to watch it again and soak up the nuance of what might be the greatest comic book adaptation since Spawn. By the time this podcast drops, it will no longer be at your local theater, but if it's streaming, you must seek it out. It may change your life.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I love Ryan.
Was it the ether, Ryan? Did the ether help you get through the movie?
Oh God, I'd like to think like he just got this huge check from Disney or something.
I kind of do want to go see it in the theater now, but I don't know. Like Morbius got all that fun stuff, but then Morbius wasn't even fun bad. Like it was just bad.
Yeah, D-Rock said you should see it in the theater. He said it was pretty funny. So
but D-Rock likes Vaseline on toast. With that, we're all out of show. But we want to thank our guest Ethan Ireland for joining us. Thank you so much, Ethan.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, we'll make sure we have you back unless the Sin Assassins get you. I'm sure they're after the Sinquisitor leadership of the Cinemania Society. I heard leader.
Well, that's the High Council is mad at us, but so far it seems like the Cinema Assassins have even less competence than we have, so I'm not that worried.
I heard Big Ben is going to join their ranks though, so
they
got a leader. They got a leader soon. I mean, I can't say too much, but I hope everyone else will join us next time as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count it,
David.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.